The city throbbed with life, a vibrant symphony of light and sound. Adana, a solitary red blood cell, coursed through its veins. She carried within her a universe, a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes invisible to all but her, captured in the sketches that overflowed from her worn backpack. During the day, she walked the sun-drenched halls of the Art Institute, her hands perpetually smudged with charcoal, her soul alight with the fire of creation. At night, she found herself immersed in the steam-filled chaos of a downtown restaurant kitchen, her hands scrubbing relentlessly, her mind focused on the simple, stark arithmetic of survival. Each delivered order, each wiped-clean table, represented a single, deliberate brushstroke in the grand painting of her future. A future where her art would finally pay the bills. Across the sprawling cityscape, in an office seemingly suspended amongst the stars, a man named Young Min presided over a different kind of empire. His was not a world of vibrant colors and textured canvas, but one defined by sharp, precise lines, hushed commands, and the oppressive weight of legacy. The towering skyscraper served as his castle, the men in dark, impeccably tailored suits who moved with quiet, almost unnerving efficiency were his loyal knights, and the ceaseless flow of money formed his kingdom's very lifeblood. But even kings can suffer from loneliness, and their gilded thrones can feel more like gilded cages. His grandfather, a man whose face was etched with the stern, unforgiving lines of a bygone era, had issued a decree, a non-negotiable demand. The family line, a source of immense pride and an unbroken chain stretching back generations, needed to continue, unabated. An heir wasn't merely a desire, it was a fundamental necessity, a duty as essential as breathing. Young Min, however, had long since locked away his heart, shielding it from the messy, unpredictable entanglements of love. He viewed marriage and family not as matters of the heart, but as strategic alliances, carefully calculated mergers. And so, he devised a novel strategy, a corporate takeover of his own bloodline, so to speak. He would find a woman intelligent, healthy, resilient, and he would present her with an offer. It would be a transaction, clean, simple, and utterly devoid of emotion. A contract for a child. Their worlds, so distant that they seemed destined to never intersect, collided on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday evening. Adana, her legs aching from a brutal double shift, had one last delivery to make, to an address that elicited a low whistle under her breath. The towering Min Corporation headquarters. She had never been inside, only ever glimpsed its gleaming, imposing exterior. The lobby was a vast cavern of polished marble, populated by silent, serious individuals. She received a special pass and was directed to the top floor. The elevator doors opened, revealing not a bustling office, but a private, unsettlingly quiet foyer. Hearing voices emanating from a slightly ajar door, she naturally assumed it was the reception area. Pushing the door open, she froze, instantly realizing her mistake. This was no break room. It was an expansive, minimalist office where a dozen men in flawlessly tailored suits stood in a semicircle, their undivided attention focused on the man seated behind a massive, dark wood desk, Young Min. His eyes, dark and impossibly sharp, lifted from his papers and locked directly onto hers. The room was instantly plunged into a silence so profound she could hear the frantic thump-thump of her own heart. The other men turned as one, their expressions unreadable, their postures rigidly stiff. Adana felt like a rabbit caught in a circle of wolves. I'm so sorry, she stammered, her voice a fragile whisper in the heavy air. Food delivery. I think I have the wrong floor. She turned to flee, but a voice, calm yet imbued with an absolute authority, stopped her in her tracks. Wait. Young Min stood up. He was even taller than she had imagined, his presence filling the space around him. He dismissed his men with a slight, almost imperceptible flick of his wrist, and they filed out without uttering a single word, leaving the two of them completely alone. He walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the plush, thick rug. He didn't appear angry, more intrigued. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze sweeping over her, not with the leering, unwelcome attention she sometimes encountered, but with the analytical focus of a man assessing a unique and unexpected asset. "You are lost," he stated, his voice a low, resonant rumble. "Yes, sir." The lobby said the penthouse, for a Mr. Kim. "You have found him," he said. He took the bag of food from her trembling hands, his fingers brushing against hers in the process. It was a simple, accidental touch, but it sent a jolt like a static shock through both of them. He glanced at her name tag on her delivery jacket. "Adana," he said, pronouncing her name slowly, as if savoring the syllables. "A beautiful name." He didn't say anything else. He just looked at her, and in that prolonged, pregnant silence, he didn't just see a delivery girl. He saw the defiance flickering in her eyes beneath the surface of fear, the inherent strength in her posture, the unconventional beauty in her features. He saw a candidate. Days passed. Adana tried desperately to forget the strange, intense encounter, dismissing it as a bizarre, fleeting moment with a rich and powerful man. But then the car arrived. A long, black, silent vehicle that pulled up directly outside her tiny, run-down apartment building. A man in a suit emerged and politely, yet firmly, asked her to accompany him. Mr. Kim requested her presence. Fear warred with a strange, undeniable sense of curiosity. What could he possibly want? She got in the car. She was taken not to the imposing office tower, but to a stunningly modern house, all glass and sharp angles, seemingly suspended above the city lights. Young Min was waiting for her in a sparsely furnished living room. He was dressed more casually, but no less intimidating. He wasted no time with pleasantries. "I have had you looked into, Adana," he began, his tone matter-of-fact. "You are 24 years old, an art student. You work 2 jobs. You send money home to your mother. You have no serious partner. Your health is excellent." A cold dread trickled down her spine. "You've been spying on me." "I needed information," he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I have a business proposal for you." He gestured for her to sit. She remained standing, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I need an heir," he said, the words stark and unadorned. "A child to carry on my name. I am not offering love. I am not offering romance. I am offering a transaction. You will live here with me for 1 year. We will try to have a child. In return, I will pay every single one of your student debts. I will ensure your mother is comfortable for the rest of her life. And when the year is over, if you wish to leave, you will do so with a generous sum that will allow you to paint for the rest of your days without ever worrying about money again." The room seemed to tilt precariously. Adana felt the air being forcibly evacuated from her lungs. It was the most outrageous, the most insulting, the most terrifying thing she had ever heard. Her initial instinct was to scream, to hurl something at his calm, handsome face, to bolt out of this glass prison and never look back. But then the other part of her, the practical, weary part that knew the exact crushing weight of her debt and the fading flicker of hope in her mother's eyes, began to calculate. A life of freedom, a life dedicated to her art, all her problems miraculously solved. The cost was her body, a year of her life, and a piece of her soul. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. That's insane. I'm not a breeding animal." "You are a woman with dreams that are currently out of reach," he corrected her, his voice still infuriatingly calm. "I am a man with a problem that needs a specific solution. We can help each other. Think about it. You don't have to decide now." He handed her a simple, thick white card with nothing but a phone number printed on it. "My private line. You have 48 hours. The car ride home was a blur of swirling emotions. For the next 2 days, Adana was consumed by a storm of internal conflict. She cried, she raged, she felt physically ill. But she also found herself staring at her half-finished paintings, at the towering stack of unpaid bills on her counter, at the worn photograph of her mother. The offer was a monster, undoubtedly, but it was a monster that held the key to her cage. On the final evening, her phone buzzed with a reminder for her student loan payment. It was the final, decisive nudge. With hands that trembled violently, She picked up the white card and dialed the number. It rang only once before he answered. Anna. She took a deep, shuddering breath, steeling her voice, finding the core of strength that had always sustained her. I have conditions, she said, her tone firmer than she felt. My own rules. A pause on the other end. State them. You will never raise your voice to me. You will treat me with respect as a person at all times, and you will not interfere with my art. If I agree to this bargain, my mind and my soul still belong to me. There was another long silence. She could almost hear him thinking, reassessing the woman on the other end of the line. Agreed, Young Min said, a faint note of what might have been respect in his voice. I will send the car for you in the morning. The transition from her own noisy, cluttered world into the stark, soundless expanse of Young Min's home was a violent shock to Adana's system. It wasn't merely a change of address. It was a migration to a different planet altogether, one with its own strange gravity and unique atmosphere. Her new room was a masterpiece of minimalist design, all neutral tones and sleek, unforgiving surfaces, a room that seemed to have been meticulously staged for a magazine shoot rather than actually lived in. The bed was large enough to get utterly lost in. The windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city she could no longer afford to be a part of, and the silence was the loudest thing she had ever experienced. There were no creaking floorboards, no distant sirens, no faint hum of a neighbor's television. It was a silence that felt heavy, expensive, and profoundly lonely. Their initial coexistence was a carefully choreographed dance of two solitary ghosts passing in the hallways. They shared meals at a table so long it could have easily seated 20 people, sitting at opposite ends. The clink of silverware against porcelain echoed in the vast, empty space. The conversations, if they could even be called that, were strictly functional and painfully brief. The car will be ready at 10 o'clock. The chef has prepared fish for dinner. There is a business dinner on Thursday. Your attendance is not required. He was a man of few words, and Adana, stubborn and fiercely proud, refused to be the one to break the oppressive quiet. She felt like a piece of furniture he had acquired, a living, breathing asset he was storing until she fulfilled her intended purpose. Her days took on a strange, suspended quality. With her debts miraculously paid and her job no longer a necessity, she had the one thing she had always desperately craved: endless, uninterrupted time to paint. Young Min had converted a sun-drenched room on the east side of the house into a studio for her, stocked with every art supply she could ever dream of. It was undeniably a cage, but it was a gilded one, bathed in perfect northern light. Yet the first time she stood before a blank canvas in that sterile, immaculate room, her inspiration fled. The immense pressure of the transaction, the chilling coldness of her surroundings, seemed to freeze the vibrant colors in her mind. She felt as though her creativity was a fragile bird that had flown headfirst into a glass window, stunned and utterly unable to find its way. It was on one of these frustrating, paintless afternoons that she ventured deeper into the house, cautiously exploring the uncharted territories beyond her assigned bedroom and studio. She discovered a library, a room of dark wood and supple leather that smelled faintly of old paper and antique polish. Her fingers trailed across the spines of books she did not recognize, written in languages she could not decipher. And then, on the mantelpiece, her eyes were drawn to a simple silver frame. It held a faded photograph of a young boy, his smile wide and unguarded, standing between a handsome, smiling couple. The man possessed Young Min's sharp, distinctive jawline. The woman had his dark, intense eyes, but their eyes were different. They were warm, crinkled at the corners with genuine, heartfelt joy. The boy in the picture was a version of Young Min she could not reconcile with the cold, calculating man she knew, a boy who looked loved and capable of love. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered down to the kitchen for a glass of water. A sliver of light escaped from beneath the closed door of his home office. Pushing it open quietly, she found him there, not working, but simply sitting in his large chair, staring out into the inky darkness beyond the window. The photograph from the library now rested on his desk, held carefully in his hands. "You should be asleep," he said, his voice low and weary, without even turning around. He possessed an almost preternatural awareness of her presence. "I could say the same to you," she replied softly, stepping further into the room. She gestured toward the photo. "They were beautiful." He remained silent for a long moment, his thumb gently stroking the glass over his father's face. "Their car went off a bridge in the rain," he said, the words stripped of all emotion, as if he were reciting a dry fact from a history textbook. "I was 10 years old. My grandfather's way of grieving was to teach me that emotion was a liability, that love was a vulnerability our enemies could exploit." He finally turned to look at her, and in the dim light, she saw not the powerful Mafia boss, but the lonely, heartbroken 10-year-old boy from the photograph. This house has been quiet ever since. It was the first truly honest thing he had shared with her, a visible crack in the impenetrable fortress of his persona. Adana did not offer empty words of sympathy. She simply stood there, sharing the silence with him, somehow making it feel a little less heavy. A subtle shift began after that night. The next day he was waiting for her at the breakfast table, not at the far end, but in the chair directly next to hers. He asked her, "What are you working on in your studio?" It was the first time he had ever inquired about her art, about something that belonged solely to her. The question unlocked something within her. She began to talk tentatively at first, then with growing passion, about her creative block, about the struggle to find her voice in all this oppressive silence. To her astonishment, he listened. He didn't just passively hear her words. He actively listened, his full, undivided attention focused on her, as if her artistic struggles were as important as his corporate mergers. Later that week, emboldened by his newfound interest, she invited him into her studio. She showed him the canvases she had brought from her old apartment, works filled with bold, vibrant colors and a dynamic, almost chaotic energy, a stark contrast to the monochrome world he typically inhabited. He walked slowly from painting to painting, his hands clasped thoughtfully behind his back. "These are full of feeling," he observed, stopping before a large piece dominated by swirling reds and golds. "This one is angry." "It is," she admitted, surprised that he could perceive it. "I painted that after a day where everything went wrong." He pointed to another canvas, a softer composition in soothing blues and purples. "And this one, that one is peaceful. It's how I feel when I listen to the rain." He turned to look at her, a new and profound respect evident in his gaze. "You put your entire heart on the canvas," he said. "That is a brave thing to do. I spend my life ensuring no one ever sees my heart." The space between them in the large house began to subtly shrink. A conversation that started casually in the hallway would continue over dinner. They began to eat together, not out of obligation, but out of a budding desire for each other's company. He started telling her small, amusing anecdotes about his day, and she would talk about an artist who had particularly inspired her. Laughter, a sound the house had likely not heard in decades, began to occasionally ring out, tentative and hesitant at first, then more freely. The first touch that wasn't an accident happened in the library. She was reaching for a book on a high shelf, and he was beside her in an instant, his hand covering hers to help guide the book out. His skin was warm, his grip firm. They both froze, the simple contact sending a sudden jolt of electricity through the quiet room. He didn't pull away immediately. His dark eyes searched hers, and for the first time, she saw not calculation, but a deep, yearning curiosity. He slowly lifted his other hand and, with a feather-like touch, traced the line of her jaw. It was a question. Her slight, almost imperceptible lean into his touch was her answer. That night he came to her room. He didn't speak. He simply stood in the doorway, a silent silhouette waiting for permission. She, standing by the bed, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs, nodded almost imperceptibly. He crossed the room, and his lips found hers in the darkness. This kiss was nothing like the cold transaction they had initially agreed upon. It was slow and deep and searching, a conversation without words. It was a confession from a man who had forgotten how to speak the language of tenderness, and an acceptance from a woman who was discovering a new dialect of her own strength. Their intimacy from that night on was irrevocably transformed. It was no longer a clinical step in a business plan for an heir. It became the place where all their unspoken words gathered and found expression. It was in the way his hands, which she had only ever seen sign documents or give commands, now learned the geography of her body with a reverent slowness. It was in the way she, who had entered this bargain with her guard raised to its highest, found herself letting those walls slowly crumble, revealing a capacity for trust and passion that surprised even her. In the darkness of her bedroom, the silent house finally found its voice. It was in the whisper of sheets, the soft exchange of breaths, and the quiet, desperate way he would say her name, Adana. As if it were a prayer he had just remembered, the bargain was still there, a piece of paper lying forgotten in a drawer somewhere. But it was beginning to fade, its ink slowly washing away in the rising tide of something real and undeniable. The change in the house was as profound as it was silent. It was no longer just a sterile structure of glass and steel, but a home breathing with a new, tender life. The quiet was no longer empty and oppressive. It was peaceful and comforting. The spaces between them were no longer vast and cold, but intimate and warm. Adana's paintings, once bold with anger and frustration, now bloomed with softer hues and hopeful, flowing shapes. Canvases of brilliant gold and serene blue began to lean against the pristine walls, little pieces of her soul slowly colonizing his sterile world. Young Min, in turn, began to leave subtle traces of himself for her. A book he thought she'd like on her bedside table, a playlist of gentle music that filled the studio, the simple, enduring fact of his presence, not as a warden, but as a companion. It was on a perfectly ordinary morning that the extraordinary revealed itself. Adana, feeling a strange, fluttering fatigue, finally took the pregnancy test she had been both dreading and secretly hoping for. When she saw the result, the world tilted on its axis. The two pink lines were a verdict, a promise, a terrifying and wonderful future all at once. She walked into the dining room where young Min was reading the news on a tablet, his brow furrowed in his usual intense concentration. She placed the test on the table in front of him. He looked down. The furrow in his brow deepened, then vanished. His face, usually a masterclass in controlled neutrality, went through a rapid, unguarded series of emotions. Confusion, dawning comprehension, shock, and then, for one breathtaking second, a flash of pure, unadulterated joy. It was there and gone so quickly she might have missed it, but she saw it. He stood up, his chair scraping softly against the floor. "It is done," he said, his voice low and strangely formal. But his eyes, fixed intently on her, were saying something else entirely. They were wide, almost vulnerable. He reached out, and his hand, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he placed it over her still flat stomach. The gesture was so possessive, so protective, and yet so full of awe that Adana's eyes filled with tears. The heir had been secured. The bargain was technically complete. But in that silent, charged moment, they both felt the terrifying truth. It was only just beginning. The joy, however, was a fragile island in a sea of peril. Young Min's world was one of shadows and rivalries, and a new heir was the ultimate prize and the ultimate target. A man named June, a rival who had been nursing a grudge for years, saw the potential vulnerability. He saw Adana not as a person, but as a key to unraveling young Min. One afternoon, as Adana was returning from a checkup at the doctor, a car swerved, forcing her vehicle to the curb. It wasn't a violent attack, just a menacing block. A man got out, tapped on her window, and when she rolled it down, terrified, he simply smiled a cold, thin smile and said, "Send our regards to Mr. Kim. Congratulations on the blessing." Then he drove away. It was a message as clear as a shard of ice. That night, young Min was a storm. The gentle man who had traced the lines of her paintings was gone, replaced by the cold, formidable boss. He paced his office like a caged tiger, his rage a palpable force in the air. When Adana came to him, he turned on her, his eyes blazing with a fear so deep it manifested as fury. "This is what I feared," he snapped, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. "This is the vulnerability. You are a target now, both of you. It is not safe. Perhaps it would be better if you left for a while until the baby is born. Until I can deal with this." His words were a physical blow. To be sent away now, after everything, felt like having her heart ripped out. But instead of crumbling, Adana felt a fierce maternal strength ignite within her. She walked right up to him, into the heart of his storm, and placed her hands firmly on his chest, feeling the frantic, terrified beat of his heart against her palms. "You listen to me, young Min," she said, her voice quiet but steely, her gaze holding his without a flicker of fear. "You hired a woman to give you an heir, but that woman is gone. I'm not a pawn in your business. I am the woman who loves you. This is not just your child. It is our child. And we do not run. We face this together. Do you understand? Together." The word loves hung in the air between them, a truth finally spoken aloud. It shattered the last of his defenses. The anger drained from his face, leaving behind a raw, unvarnished terror warred with a profound, overwhelming love. He crumpled then, pulling her tightly into his arms, burying his face in the soft strands of her hair. "I cannot lose you," he whispered, his voice ragged with emotion. "I cannot lose either of you." It was the raw confession of a man who had finally stumbled upon something of far greater value than his legacy, something worth more than his very soul. The resolution that followed was swift and decisively executed. Young men, employing the cold, brutal efficiency so characteristic of his world, handled the potential threat emanating from June. It was not a subject he ever broached with Adana, and she, in turn, wisely refrained from inquiring. The shadow that had loomed so large simply vanished without a trace. The air cleared, becoming lighter, easier to breathe. Peace, hard-won and infinitely precious, settled like a comfortable blanket over their home. A week later, he led her to the secluded private garden that bloomed on the rooftop of their sprawling home, a secret sanctuary he had lovingly constructed for his mother many years ago. The dazzling city glittered far below them, but up here, enveloped by the heady fragrance of night-blooming flowers, it felt as if they were the only two souls in the entire world. He turned to face her, his large hands gently holding hers. "Adana," he began, his voice thick with a tide of overwhelming emotion. "Our story commenced with a bargain. It was a soulless contract, coldly written in ink, designed as a solution to a very specific problem. It was, without a doubt, both the worst and the best deal I have ever made in my entire life." Then, with a grace that belied his imposing size, he dropped to one knee, and Adana's breath hitched in her throat. He produced a small, velvet box from his pocket. Opening it revealed a stunningly simple diamond ring that seemed to capture and amplify the starlight around them. "But my heart," he continued, his voice full of sincere emotion, "has written a new contract. One not limited to a single year but for a lifetime. Not for a mere heir, but for a true partner. Not for a temporary solution, but for a deep and abiding love that I never even dreamed I would be fortunate enough to find. I am asking you now for a new bargain, Adana. A bargain that will last for forever. Will you marry me?" Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed freely down Adana's face as she gazed at this powerful, yet profoundly lonely man who had, against all odds, learned to love again because of her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking with the sheer weight of her emotion. "Yes, I will bargain with you, forever." Their forever began not with a lavish and ostentatious wedding, but with the quiet, everyday miracles of a life organically built together, brick by precious brick. Their son was born with his father's serious, contemplative eyes and his mother's bright, fiercely curious spirit. The once silent and echoing house was now gloriously filled with a vibrant symphony of new and joyful sounds. The sweet, gurgling laughter of a contented baby, the gentle rustle of turning pages as Adana lovingly read stories aloud, and the low, rumbling sound of young men's genuine laughter, a sound that had quickly become as familiar and comforting as her own steady heartbeat. Her paintings now eloquently told a brand new story, one of deep, unwavering love, fiery passion, and fierce, protective strength. The cold, sterile glass house had miraculously transformed into a warm and loving home, a living testament to a most unusual beginning that had somehow blossomed into the most beautiful of endings. A purely transactional business deal had blossomed into a full and vibrant life. A simple, cold bargain had miraculously become a glorious forever. Did Adana and young men's extraordinary journey from a cold, calculated contract to a warm, loving family capture your heart and stir your soul? If you long to be swept away by even more stories where seemingly impossible and unexpected beginnings miraculously lead to forever love, be sure to subscribe to the channel for your next deeply romantic escape. Your next favorite story, filled with passion and intrigue, is waiting just for you.